I moved into the house in late October. It sat at the very end of a narrow dead-end road outside a small town in western Pennsylvania called Maple Glen. There were only 6 houses on the street, all spaced far apart with patches of woods between them. During the day, it felt peaceful, quiet. The kind of neighborhood where people waved from their driveways and left Halloween decorations out weeks too long. At night, though, the street felt isolated in a way I never really got used to. The rental itself wasn't much. 1 floor, 2 bedrooms, old hardwood floors that creaked whenever I crossed the hallway. The landlord rented it cheap because the place had been sitting empty for almost a year before I moved in. Still, it was close enough to town and perfect for someone like me who worked remotely. Most days, I barely left the house. I was doing freelance video editing back then, spending 12 hours a day at my desk wearing headphones and talking to clients through emails instead of actual conversations. My social life was basically non-existent. My friends always texted before stopping by, and deliveries were rare because I usually picked things up myself. That's why the first knock immediately stood out. It happened on a Thursday night around 8:40. I was halfway through reheating leftovers while some random documentary played on the TV in the living room when I heard 4 slow knocks hit the front door. Not aggressive, not loud, just deliberate. I muted the TV and listened. A few seconds later, 2 more knocks followed. I walked over and looked through the peephole. A man stood on my porch holding a cardboard box against his chest. He looked normal enough, mid-30s maybe, dark baseball cap, black windbreaker, short beard. Nothing about him immediately screamed danger. I cracked the door open, but kept the chain latched. "Delivery for Ethan Cole," he said, glancing at a small electronic scanner in his hand. "That's not me," I replied. He frowned and checked the screen again. Then he read my exact address out loud. I remember that detail because it immediately confused me. Wrong person. Nobody here by that name. The man looked up from the scanner and stared at me for a second too long. Not angry, not annoyed, just studying me. Finally, he nodded once. "Sorry about that. Must have been entered wrong." Then he turned and walked down the porch steps. I waited by the door expecting him to climb into a delivery truck parked nearby, but there wasn't one. No van, no car, nothing. He walked past the mailbox, reached the end of the street, and disappeared around the corner. That was the first moment something felt off, but I still managed to convince myself there was probably a reasonable explanation. Maybe he parked farther away. Maybe he worked for some small contractor service. Maybe I was overthinking it. The next night, at nearly the exact same time, the knocking returned. 3 firm knocks this time. The second I looked through the peephole and saw the same man standing there holding the same box, a cold feeling settled into my stomach. I didn't open the door. I just spoke through it. "You already came yesterday." For several seconds, he said nothing. Then calmly, "I still need a signature." "There's nobody here by that name," I replied. Another long pause. Then he stepped slightly closer to the door. "The system says this package has to be delivered tonight." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. Not angry, not threatening, almost rehearsed. "I'm not signing anything." He stayed there for several more seconds, then finally, "All right." I watched through the peephole as he backed off the porch, but instead of leaving immediately, he slowly turned his head toward the front windows, then toward the driveway, then toward the side of the house, like he was memorizing everything. The whole time, he still held the package. Finally, he walked down the driveway and disappeared again, without getting into any visible vehicle. That night, I checked every lock in the house twice before going to bed. By the third night, I was anxious before sunset even arrived, but no knock came. I actually laughed at myself around midnight for getting so paranoid over some weird delivery guy. Then the 4th night happened. Around 9 p.m., I was washing dishes in the kitchen when I heard 4 knocks again. Only this time, they weren't coming from the front door. They came from the dining room window beside me. I nearly dropped the plate in my hand. The knocks were soft but unmistakable. Tap, 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 tap. I froze and stared toward the dark window. Nobody was there. Then immediately afterward, another 4 knocks sounded from the front door. My heart started hammering. I walked quietly toward the entryway and looked through the peephole. It was him again, except now he wasn't holding the package anymore. His hands hung loosely at his sides. He knocked once more and stepped back. Then he stared directly toward the peephole. I backed away from the door quickly. I almost stumbled. For nearly 30 seconds, there was complete silence. Then I heard his footsteps descend the porch steps. I waited several minutes before checking the windows. Keeping the lights off, I carefully peeked through the blinds in the living room. Across the street, near the tree line, I saw him standing motionless in the dark, facing my house. Even from that distance, I could feel it. He wasn't confused about the address. He wasn't trying to deliver anything. He was watching me. After about a minute, he turned and disappeared into the woods bordering the road. I barely slept that night. The following morning, I called the local non-emergency police line. The officer I spoke with listened quietly while I explained everything. When I finished, he sighed. "Sounds like someone checking occupancy," he said. "What does that mean?" "Burglars sometimes knock first. If nobody answers over several days, they assume the home's empty." A chill ran through me. He advised me to install cameras and call 911 immediately if the man returned. That night, I shut every blind in the house before sunset. I left the front lights off and stayed in my bedroom pretending I wasn't home. At exactly 8:46 p.m., 4 knocks echoed through the house again. I stayed completely silent. A few seconds later, 4 more knocks followed. Then silence. I thought maybe he had left, until I heard something hit the back of the house. A dull metallic thud. Then another. I slowly stepped into the hallway, clutching my phone tightly. And then I heard it. The slow turning of my back door handle. Once. Twice. Then the sound of metal scraping softly against the frame. I backed away from the hallway as quietly as I could while dialing 911 with shaking hands. The operator answered almost immediately, but I had to whisper because every sound inside the house suddenly felt dangerous. I explained that someone was trying to force their way into my back door, while another person was likely still standing near the front entrance. The dispatcher told me officers were already being sent and instructed me to stay hidden and remain on the line. While she talked to me, the scraping sound at the back door continued. Slow, careful. Whoever was out there wasn't kicking the door or trying to smash it down. They were trying to get in quietly. That terrified me more than if they'd just broken the door apart. Then the front knocking started again. 4 slow knocks, exactly the same as before. It hit me then that there were at least 2 people outside, one distracting me at the front while another worked on the back entrance. I locked myself inside the bedroom and shoved my dresser against the door, even though I knew it wouldn't stop anyone for long. The dispatcher kept asking if I could hear voices, but I couldn't. Only footsteps occasionally shifting outside and the faint sound of metal against wood. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. No knocking, no scraping, no footsteps. Just silence. I stayed frozen in the dark for what felt like forever, until flashing red and blue lights finally spilled through the edges of my blinds. I nearly collapsed from relief. The police searched around the property with flashlights while I cautiously came outside. One officer immediately pointed out fresh pry marks near the back door handle. Another found muddy shoe prints beneath my kitchen window. Whoever had been out there had circled the house multiple times. The officers drove through nearby streets searching for suspicious vehicles, but nobody was found. Before leaving, one of them told me something that made my stomach twist. "You were smart not to open the door again," he said. "This wasn't random." The next evening, I packed a bag and stayed at my older brother Caleb's apartment across town. I didn't tell anyone online that I wasn't home because the police specifically warned me not to advertise it. Around 9:15 that night, my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Henley, who lived 2 houses down from me. She sounded nervous. She said there was a man standing on my porch, knocking repeatedly. I asked if it was the same guy. She said yes immediately. Dark jacket, baseball cap, standing there with a cardboard box again. My chest tightened. "Do you see a vehicle?" I asked. "No," she whispered, "but he keeps looking around your house." I told her to call the police immediately. Officers arrived within minutes this time and questioned the man directly in front of my house. Later that night, one of the officers called me back. The man claimed he worked for a delivery company and was trying to complete a package drop-off, but he couldn't produce any company identification. The scanner he carried wasn't connected to any real shipping service either. They warned him to stay away from the property and released him because technically they couldn't prove he'd attempted anything beyond trespassing. That alone kept me awake almost the entire night. The idea that he was still free somewhere nearby made my skin crawl. 2 days later, though, everything changed. Around noon, I received another call from the same officer. They had arrested the man in a neighboring town after a homeowner caught him attempting to break into a vacant property. This time, they found evidence in his vehicle: multiple empty cardboard boxes, fake delivery labels, a handheld scanner programmed with random addresses, crowbars, gloves, zip ties. According to the officer, detectives believed he had been targeting isolated homes for months. His method was simple. He'd pose as a delivery driver and visit houses repeatedly over several nights. If someone answered consistently, he marked the home occupied and moved on. But if lights changed patterns or nobody answered after several visits, he'd return later and force entry, believing the house was empty. What shook me most was learning that he rarely worked alone. Another man had been arrested with him. Suddenly, the second set of footsteps outside my house made horrifying sense. During questioning, they admitted my home had become a target because of how isolated it was. One detective later told me they believed the pair had likely intended to break in that final night, regardless of whether someone was inside. Apparently, burglars sometimes assume people living alone are easier to control if confronted. Hearing that made me physically sick. For weeks afterwards, I couldn't stop replaying every interaction with him in my head. The way he studied my windows, the way he stood across the street watching my house, the way he kept returning night after night, testing whether I was alone. I realized how close I came to making a deadly mistake. If I'd opened the door fully the first night instead of using the chain, he could have forced his way inside immediately. If I'd ignored the knocks completely during those early visits, he probably would have assumed the house was empty much sooner. 3 months later, when my lease ended, I moved out without hesitation. I found an apartment in a busy complex closer to town, where neighbors were always around and security cameras covered every entrance. Even now, though, unexpected knocking still makes my chest tighten. I never answer the door unless I know exactly who's coming. Every package delivery gets checked through cameras first, and anytime someone shows up claiming they have a package with my address but somebody else's name attached to it, I don't go near the door at all anymore. Christmas had always been my favorite time of year growing up. Not because of presents or decorations, but because it was the only season when my entire family slowed down long enough to actually spend time together. My parents worked constantly. My younger brothers were usually glued to their phones or gaming consoles, and I spent most of my time stressed over school. But every December, things changed. The house felt warmer, louder, safer. Back then, we lived in a quiet neighborhood just outside Inverness, Scotland. The street curved around a small cul-de-sac with rows of attached brick houses facing one another. During winter, the whole area looked frozen in place. Porch lights reflected off wet pavement, Chimneys filled the air with smoke, and nearly every house had some kind of glowing decoration hanging in the windows. I was 16 when this happened. A few days before Christmas, my family was crowded into the living room watching old holiday movies together. My mom was curled up beneath a blanket on the couch, my dad sat in his recliner drinking tea, and my two younger brothers were sprawled across the carpet arguing over chocolates from a holiday tin. At some point during the movie, there was a knock at the front door. Nobody thought much of it. People visited constantly around Christmas. My mom got up and answered it while the rest of us stayed focused on the TV. Then, a minute later, she came back looking confused. "There's nobody there," she said. Dad glanced toward the hallway. "Kids, probably." That explanation made sense at the time. Neighborhood teenagers played stupid pranks constantly. Knocking and running away wasn't unusual, so we shrugged it off and finished the movie. But 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, I was alone downstairs finishing coursework at the dining room table while everyone else was upstairs getting ready for bed. Around 10:25, 3 soft knocks echoed through the hallway. I remember immediately feeling irritated. I walked to the front door expecting to catch some local kids running down the street laughing, but when I opened it, the road outside was completely empty. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Cold wind drifted through the porch while the streetlights reflected off damp pavement. I checked both directions before shutting the door again. Still, something about it unsettled me. Usually, pranksters made noise. You heard running or laughing afterward. This felt too quiet. Over the next week, the knocking kept happening, always at night, always when things were calm and quiet inside the house. Sometimes it happened early in the evening, sometimes close to midnight, but every single time, nobody was there when we checked. Eventually, it became a running conversation inside our family group chat. "Door ghost is back," my younger brother joked after hearing another knock while taking the trash outside. But my dad didn't seem amused anymore. One night, around 11:30, long after everyone else had gone upstairs, he heard another knock while sitting alone in the living room watching television. This time, it was quieter than before, just 3 faint taps. Dad checked through the peephole first. Nobody. He opened the door anyway and stepped outside onto the porch. The street was completely empty. No movement anywhere. When he came upstairs afterward, I could tell from his expression something about it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "You'd think we'd catch somebody eventually," he muttered. That was the part that started getting to all of us. Whoever kept doing it never got seen, not once. Christmas Day finally arrived, and for a while we forgot about the whole thing. The house was packed with relatives most of the day. My aunt cooked enough food for 30 people. My brothers nearly destroyed the wrapping paper situation in the living room, and everyone stayed up late watching movies while snow lightly fell outside. By the time the night settled down, I felt sick from eating too much and eventually went upstairs around midnight. I must have fallen asleep almost immediately. When I woke again, the room was pitch black. For several seconds, I didn't even know why I'd opened my eyes. Then I checked my phone. 2:03 a.m. Everyone else in the house was asleep. Normally, once I wake up during the night, I stay awake for hours, so I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through videos quietly beneath my blanket. After maybe 20 minutes, I heard it. Knock. A single soft knock somewhere nearby. I froze instantly. At first, I thought it came from my bedroom door. Then I wondered if it came from the window, or maybe downstairs. I sat upright, listening hard while my heart started pounding. Nothing followed. The silence inside the house felt overwhelming. Eventually, I convinced myself I imagined it. Then, I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming up the staircase. At first, I relaxed slightly because my dad usually stayed awake later than everyone else during holidays. I assumed he was finally heading upstairs to bed. I opened my bedroom door slightly, just enough to peek out. The upstairs hallway was dark, except for faint yellow light rising from the stairwell below. And halfway up the stairs was a man I had never seen. Everything inside me went cold. He was huge, broad shoulders, thick beard, balding head. His movements looked unsteady, like he was heavily drunk. For a second, my brain literally refused to process what I was seeing. Then the man grabbed the railing and continued climbing the stairs. That snapped me out of it. I slowly backed into my room and quietly pushed the door closed before he looked up. My entire body shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone. The footsteps continued into the hallway, then stopped. A door creaked open somewhere nearby. My younger brother's room. A few seconds later, it closed again. Then another bedroom door opened. The man was checking rooms. I remember staring at my bedroom door, thinking it was only a matter of time before the handle turned. For several seconds, I completely froze. I couldn't think properly, couldn't breathe normally. The hallway floor creaked again outside my room. Closer now. Then another bedroom door opened across the hall. That finally forced me to move. I quietly cracked my door open just enough to peek out. The man stumbled out of my younger brother's room, scratching at the wall to keep balance. The second his back turned towards the staircase, I sprinted, barefoot, heart hammering, straight into my parents' room. I slammed the door behind me hard enough to wake both of them instantly. "There's someone upstairs," I whispered harshly. "There's a man in the house." My mom sat upright immediately, while my dad looked completely disoriented for the first few seconds. I kept repeating that there was a man upstairs, that I had just seen him walking through the hallway opening bedroom doors. The panic in my voice must have made it real for them, because within seconds, both of them were out of bed. My dad grabbed the baseball bat he kept beside the wardrobe, while my mom told me to stay behind her. None of us even thought about my brothers at first, because our brains were moving too fast to process everything clearly. Then, suddenly, the hallway floor creaked again outside the bedroom, and all four of us froze. Whoever was out there had stopped moving. For several long seconds, there was complete silence. Then, we heard another bedroom door slowly open somewhere farther down the hall, my youngest brother's room. Dad immediately pushed past us and stepped into the hallway, while my mom rushed after him. I followed despite her yelling for me to stay back. The upstairs landing was dark except for the weak glow coming from the stairwell below. At first, we didn't see anyone. Then, my dad suddenly pointed toward the stairs. The man was halfway down them already, gripping the railing awkwardly as he stumbled toward the living room below. He looked heavily intoxicated. Even from behind, I could smell alcohol drifting upstairs. Dad shouted at him immediately, "Who the hell are you?" The man turned around slowly with this irritated expression, like we were the ones bothering him. His eyes looked unfocused and glassy. "This is my house," he slurred. My stomach dropped hearing him say that so casually. Mom told him to get out immediately, while Dad started down the stairs toward him with the bat still in hand. Instead of panicking, the man actually looked annoyed. "You people are in my house," he repeated angrily. By then, my brothers had both woken up and stepped nervously into the hallway upstairs behind us. I remember how surreal the entire thing felt. Christmas lights still glowed around the living room downstairs, while this complete stranger wandered through our house insisting it belonged to him. Dad reached the bottom of the stairs first and tried forcing the man toward the front door, but he was enormous and barely cooperating. At one point, he actually collapsed sideways onto the couch, like he intended to stay there permanently. Several beer bottles from the fridge had somehow already ended up open on the coffee table beside him. Mom started yelling at him, while Dad threatened to call the police. The man just kept muttering that we needed to leave his house. Finally, Dad lost patience completely. He grabbed the man beneath the arms and physically dragged him off the couch toward the side door leading into the garden. The entire time, the guy cursed and stumbled around like dead weight. Eventually, Dad managed to shove him outside into the snow before slamming the door behind him and locking it. For about 5 seconds, everything went silent. Then, Glass exploded inward. Mom screamed as shattered pieces sprayed across the kitchen floor. The man had punched straight through the side window beside the door. Blood covered his hand and wrist, but he either didn't notice or didn't care. He shoved his face partially through the broken opening and started screaming at us. "I know where you live," he shouted. "This is my house. I'll come back. I'll kill you all." I still remember the look in his eyes, pure rage mixed with drunken confusion. Finally, Dad managed to call the police while keeping us all farther back from the shattered window. The man continued yelling outside for another minute before eventually stumbling away into the darkness. By the time police arrived, he was gone. Officers searched the neighborhood while taking statements from all of us inside the house. Mine took the longest because I was the first person who'd seen him upstairs. I remember sitting wrapped in a blanket while one officer asked me over and over if I recognized the man from anywhere. I didn't. None of us did. About 40 minutes later, another officer returned with an update. Because fresh snow had fallen earlier that evening, they'd managed to follow a trail of blood drops leading down the street toward a nearby playground. They found the man lying near a bench with cuts all over his hands from smashing the glass. He was arrested immediately. Over the following days, we learned more about him. His name was Graham Mercer, and years before my family moved into that house, he had actually lived there briefly. According to police, he'd been out drinking heavily with friends on Christmas night and somehow convinced himself he still lived there. That explained why he wandered inside so confidently after discovering the door unlocked. But it didn't explain the knocking. When detectives questioned him about the repeated late-night knocking over the previous weeks, he denied knowing anything about it. He claimed he'd never been near our house before that night. Whether that was true or not, none of us ever found out. Part of me still thinks it had to be him. The timing felt too strange to be coincidence. But another part of me wonders if whoever had been knocking was somebody else entirely. Somebody watching the house, long before Christmas night ever happened. Eventually, the broken window was replaced, life moved on, and the whole incident became one of those terrifying family stories everyone brings up during holidays. Still, even years later, I can't hear unexpected knocking late at night without feeling my chest tighten. And every Christmas when the house goes quiet after everyone falls asleep, I still catch myself listening carefully for footsteps on the stairs.